I hope everyone drinks some good beers and takes care of your servers. So, for those of you that didn't see the website, the vision tonight is we've got some featured readers, all of whom are local or semi-local, so I'm very excited about that. We have a panel it's going to be an hour long, and then we're going to have an open mic. So anyone here who wants to read, we are encouraging that. So I want to hear some good stuff tonight. So we're going to start with some readings, and we do have a volunteer. I've got, I think, 6 readers here, and I'm really looking forward. I'm going to introduce each of them before they read. But our first reader tonight is Hannah. Hannah Greco said that she wasn't opposed to going first, therefore she's going to have to go first. So let me introduce Hannah to everyone. Hannah is a writer and advocate in Arlington, Virginia. She's published essays in the Washington Post, the Huffington Post, Today's Parent, Baltimore Sun, Your Teen, Motherwell, First for Women, and many more publications. She can be found online at www.hgrieco.com and on Twitter at WritesLoud. Please, everyone, welcome our first reader of the festival, Hannah Greco.
Hey, thank you. I did not expect to do 2 pieces, so I have one on a phone, and I'm a little old, so bear with me to see if I can pull the phone one off. All right. Young readers always read off their phone. I've learned this, but it's new for me, so. All right. One of these tonight is an essay and one is a short story. I'm not going to tell you which one. You guys can guess. My 10-year-old son starts to rap after someone on YouTube says Eminem is autistic. I don't know if Eminem is autistic or not, I tell him. YouTube says lots of things. Sorry. He looks worried all the time. He tilts his head, holding the worn-out headphones in place. He writes exactly what I think. He writes about stapling his teacher's testicles to the desk, I say. I love him, my son says. But the radio edits make me nervous. I wait for the empty spaces and this bad feeling builds inside me, knowing they're coming and just waiting for them. Suspense in any form is unbearable. He shivers and opens and shuts his hands, fists to flat palms and back, over and over until I place my hands on his. Don't tell your dad. I download the explicit albums. Graphic sexual acts and abuse and drugs he's never heard of. To my relief, he barely notices the actual content. He just loves profanity. Every fuck makes him chuckle. If you teach your sisters any of this, I'm deleting the albums, I warn him. Hee hee, he cackles as Tommy Lee whoops Pamela's ass. I used to think it just meant donkey. Is it still misogyny if the listener is unaware of the context? I do not bring up girlfriends locked in trunks or wives getting murdered. I step back and listen to the music with a 10-year-old's ears. Magical 4-letter wordplay. My son hears himself in these lyrics. The isolation, anger, and frustration about authority figures and expectations, about who and what is acceptable, about what it means to deserve love or even basic acceptance. The message is wrapped in clever rhyme schemes that he can touch and manipulate. It distances itself from his overloaded heart with its playfulness, allowing him to think and feel without becoming frozen by panic. It allows him to talk about his experience, even in day-to-day interactions. Read me one of your poems, I say. My son's raps follow the exact same rhythmic patterns as Eminem's, but he creates his own themes and poorly spelled word combinations. The confines of an established, successful form give him the confidence to explore his own world. He shares his new words at school, and the teachers love this new hobby at first. His classroom assistant has him sign her cell phone case. He begins to think, learn, and demonstrate knowledge in rhyme more often than not. He bursts out in math with long verses about angles and the formulas for area and perimeter, and before long his classroom teacher is torn between admiration and irritation. He is smarter than her other students. He is also louder. That was very good, she says, but can we share at the end of the day? Wait, I have one more. I get daily emails. Your son cannot stop rapping. I need your son to stop rapping. I admire your son's commitment to rapping, but it is very difficult to teach the parts of a plant cell while someone is loudly rapping about mitochondria in the back of the classroom. Poetry is my special interest right now, Mom. You're a writer. You should understand. Yeah, but I don't yell out passages from my novel while your teacher is explaining the differences between a cell wall and a cell membrane. I drop subject-appropriate rhymes. I'm listening and learning, and she's mad. This is a valid point. There are rules we follow in school. I cringe as I say this. I am also a teacher, but it's different when it's your own kid. A grunt. He walks over and sits down in front of his laptop. He opens it, cracks his knuckles like he saw Snoopy do in a Charlie Brown cartoon years ago, and starts tapping at the keys. I tap at my own across from him, sneaking peeks as he alternates between grimaces and smiles, listening to him mutter, pounding on his backspace button, revealing an imagination I thought he didn't have, an imagination he never disclosed until he started writing. After 45 minutes, I have written half of a chapter that I will probably throw away. It's garbage. My son prints a page and hands it to me, whispering along over my shoulder as I read expertly rhyming lines about small-minded teachers and mothers who stand up for free speech. He writes jokes within the lines. Utilizing the sarcasm he struggles to understand in real-time discussions, expressing himself through words that he cannot say out loud unless he has written them down first. You should write my novel for me, I complain. No, Mom, that's your special interest. I can't wait to see your book on the library shelf. I will bring all my friends over and point to it and say, my mom wrote that. I do not cry. Then I'll write a rap about you, just like Eminem does about his mom. Wait a minute, a wild laugh, head thrown back, and he takes off up the stairs. Rhyming love insults fly over his shoulders toward me, his laptop held tightly to his chest. He will not be able to rap his way into college, or even into receiving an invitation to sit at the lunch table with the other boys in his class. And I wish he'd picked almost any other artist, at least for now, to emulate and idolize. But this is my son communicating, sharing what he knows and feels with the world around him, instead of holding it inside. And it's this music that was the catalyst. Will we need to have a larger conversation about these songs and their meaning at some point? Do I worry about him internalizing messages that a 10-year-old doesn't have the tools to deconstruct? Yes. But I also know that my son has learned there is power in telling his story. He sees others listening to and understanding his words, and his desire to speak and share, to interact with the world, grows in turn. The last 6 months of him rapping have changed his mindset, which is no small thing for an autistic child. Together, my son and Eminem built a bridge. I will enjoy every moment of him walking across it, my ears burning, my son's heart on brilliant rhyming display. This is I wasn't supposed to do, obviously that was the essay. This is a short story that came out this year in Hobart, an online literary journal. At my husband's funeral, we drank Moscow mules. I served them in copper mugs, just like you're supposed to, and everyone thought it was adorable and heartfelt. My husband's ability to make the perfect mule was well known. We drank them several times a week, but only at home. No bar could make them like he could. Not too sweet, a little spicy, heavy-handed with the Icelandic vodka we both preferred. My husband hated copper mugs, though, and nobody knew that but me. He thought they made the drink taste metallic. So I handed them out, smirking at his rolling eyes behind every mourner. He thought the copper mug trend was stupid and cloying, and that people who followed trends were stupid and cloying. He also readily admitted that both he and I followed many trends. That we only strayed from beer and wine to this one cocktail a couple of years ago after reading an article about it in the Washington Post. "You're a phony," I said to him once my sister-in-law had finished leaving a wet patch of tears on my shoulder. "You just heard that somewhere and you thought it sounded cool," he answered, as his father stepped through him to place a calloused hand on my cheek. That night, we fucked, though he called it making love. Still making love, 13 years and a child and even death into this union, and still, I loved fucking him. I loved it more than I did even when we were young and dramatic and going at it in club hallways, behind cigarette machines, on stairways at parties, in the kitchen at a friend's dinner gathering. I loved that now he kissed my eyebrows gently, drying sparks from tired skin. Sometimes before, I had wished he'd loved me less so I could withdraw, but my attempts at crawling into myself were only tolerated for so long before he would love lasso me out. "I missed you," he said, pulling me close. "I was only checking Facebook in the bathroom," I answered. We made a child 9 years before he died, a son so similar to his father that it was as if he had simply shot out a small branch and I'd clipped it, repotting it in the smallest amount of my soil. I could see me somewhere in there, but mostly it was my husband. And like his father, he was a funny mixture of island and tsunami. I was the swimmer, caught at the crest of their waves, pushed toward shore, hovering over the solid earth but not making contact. Never dunked or scratched up, occasionally thrilled at the height and view, always tired. "He's pretty messed up," I told my husband, touching our son's eyebrow after his twitching legs finally stilled and his breathing became steady and rhythmic. "Your funeral was too much for him." "He was messed up before I died," he answered. Our son was silent at school, but at home he exploded with stories and ideas. He yelled at the dog and demanded my constant attention. When I didn't understand what he was trying to say, he became enraged, accusing me of not listening. His father's son. "You don't feel anything I feel," my son said to me. "I don't even feel what I feel," I answered. It amused my husband to see me struggle like this with our child. He understood exactly what our son felt. It was so clear to him, so obvious. You could hold it in your hand if you just looked closely enough. But I was too tired to focus my vision in that way. Loving them was a steady drain, and I had to shut down certain functions to avoid napping for hours or refusing to feed anybody. My husband watched over my shoulder as I put our son to bed 2 nights after the funeral. He offered commentary on the gray hue to his skin and the bags under his eyes. He needed to go to bed earlier. He needed a week off of school. Maybe we should go to the mountains. Maybe I should speak with his teacher about reducing his workload. "You are really not in a position to boss me around," I said. "You're so defensive," he answered. I lay in his arms that night, listening to the purring of his inhales and exhales, my right ear pressed hard to his chest. He had the body of a 16-year-old, firm and lean, even as I grew softer every year. We were opposites, wrapping around each other, and I had no identity outside of that. "It's time, isn't it?" he asked. "No, please," I answered. And I listened to his breathing all night, sinking under the wave, inhaling and exhaling to match him, breathing in water and fish and seaweed, growing gills to stay there, convincing myself that being a mermaid was the same, better even. He wasn't in bed when the alarm went off. I heard my son peeing in the hallway bathroom. I heard the dog's nails on the wooden floor, stopping outside our bedroom door, squeaky jaw yawning. "I wish you would take the dog out for once," I said. "I'll do it," I answered.
Thank you so much, Hannah. Our next reader is Kara Oakleaf, and I will introduce Kara. Kara's work has appeared in Smoke Long Quarterly, Wig Leaf, Jellyfish Review, Money Bicycle, Nimrod, Stirring, Tahoma Literary Review, and elsewhere. Her fiction has been listed in the Wig Leaf Top 50 as a finalist for Best Small Fictions and appears in the Bloomsbury Anthology Short Form Creative Writing. Originally from Ohio, she graduated from Denison University and earned her MFA at George Mason University, where she now teaches writing and literature, and she directs the Fall for the Book Literary Festival. Kara lives in Northern Virginia with her husband and daughter. Please welcome Kara Oakleaf.
Thank you so much, and thank you, Sean, for having me. I'm really happy to be here. So I'm going to read two short stories tonight. One of the things I've been enjoying doing this week is reading all the coverage of the moon landing, because the 50th anniversary is tomorrow. So I thought for tonight I would read a short story that is set on the moon. This is called The Astronauts Baseball League. The Astronauts Baseball League is forever losing balls to low orbit. A line drive sails over the right fielder's outstretched glove, a pop-up foul arcs backwards and never drops, and the game pauses as someone retrieves another ball from a storage compartment inside the shuttle. The moon's moons, the astronauts joke, as the balls fly over the outfield and off into the space-dark sky. Just as the ancients named planets and stars for the creatures from their own mythologies, the astronauts choose a name for each baseball that flies out of reach. Because they've seen no sign of gods up here, the astronauts use the names of the wives and children they've been missing all these long months. Carla, Miles, Aubrey, Elena, Noah, all satellites circling. The shortstop listens to the names come through his earpiece, surrounded by static that reminds him of the real baseball games of his childhood, coming through the AM radio while he lay at the foot of his father's easy chair, or the broken voice of an announcer cutting across the field in his Little League games. He smiles with the other astronauts as they name their fist-sized moons, these men who don't hesitate when it's their turn to pick a name, these men who have someone they love enough to make immortal. When the games end, he dreams of a single face as he sleeps in his bunk in the shuttle, his ankles and wrists strapped down to steady him. The astronauts have been here for a full season, mapping the terrain, digging into the rocks, and spreading out for a game when their day of work is done. They've grown used to the limitations of a game without gravity, the way their helmets cut off their peripheral vision in the outfield. They circle the bases slowly, the action slowed to the speed of a replay. There's no sandy diamond cut into the chalk-white surface of the moon, no outfield trimmed in alternating bands of green 3/4-inch grass. Spacesuits with no pinstripes or logos, save for the NASA patches and American flags stitched on like Boy Scout badges. There are no halogen lamps stories above their heads dropping light onto the field. Just a half Earth in the background, blue and white and swirling as a cat's eye marble against the black sky. And the shortstop marvels at how it seems to give off its own light. Lately, he's stopped seeing her face at night and dreams only of this corner of the moon, of their baseball field, and the feeling of his body, light as a child, crouching into its stance in the infield. The Earth is somehow too far to reach him. The shortstop is not much of a hitter himself, but one day, late in the season, he slugs one deep and it's gone, above the head of the center fielder, and everyone is groaning and cheering into the static, and the third baseman wanders off to find a replacement. Before he circles the bases, the shortstop watches the ball disappear and whispers a name into the glass frame of his helmet. As he rounds first, the shortstop watches the graceful way the men move as they shift in their places on the field, how they're almost waltzing. This is what he loved in the first days of the Astronauts Baseball League, the unboundedness of it all. Back home, there was too much holding him to the world, where he wandered his apartment at night, drawn to something she'd left behind. A tin of mint tea in the pantry, the silver back of an earring fallen behind the nightstand. 3 bright drops of nail polish staining the bathroom floor in perfect circles like miniature pieces of fruit. In the mornings, he woke to find himself rolled to her side of the bed, still susceptible to her gravity, gently drifting toward the empty space she used to fill. And now he relishes the lightness of the moon, where he can't feel her drawing him in any direction. But in the final week of the mission, he watches from the sidelines as the pitcher releases what should be a perfect curveball, and this space can't hold it. It veers off course before the catcher drops his mitt to the ground to grab it. The shortstop catches himself thinking of baseball back home, on sand and grass, the gunshot crack of a bat meeting the pitch at 100 miles per hour, the sharp whip of a practice swing that creates a thin slice of wind, the hard thwacks of the ball hitting your glove, and the particular shade of green that stains your elbows when you dive to the ground to catch a fly ball that's almost out of reach. He wants to feel it again, how fast the ground comes up to meet you on dive or slide into first base, the sandy dirt and grass streaked on the uniform. In the midst of this beautiful weightlessness, he's starting to miss how the earth pulls you close, the feeling of a land that sticks to him. In the last nights of the mission, the shortstop dreams not of baseball on the moon, or of her face, or of his own weightlessness, but of black holes, a heavy darkness that fascinated him as a child, a piece of the sky where everything collapses and takes the light with it, off to some invisible place a universe away, where maybe something else is shining. Now, an outfielder chases down a line drive to end the game, and as the astronauts gather at the edge of the field, the shortstop watches the blackened horizon for a white leather moon with thick red stitches that carries her name. He thinks of how it will keep circling, and that a little while from now, it will pass over this bare patch of moon that once held a baseball diamond, and he is the one who will be gone. And then one more flash piece. This is called, sort of keeping with the theme, this is called Gravity Reduced. We noticed the coins first. The night before, a Tuesday, we drifted off to sleep in the ordinary world, and sometime in the night, the earth loosened its hold on us. We woke to floating discs of copper and nickel above the nightstand where we'd emptied our pockets, yesterday's change suspended in the air like a model solar system. We saw our children walking on air, their feet skimming empty space inches above the floor. When we stepped out of bed, we felt it, how our heels didn't quite sink into the carpet. No more footprints. In the bathroom mirror, we saw our hair lifting away from our faces, fanned out and wild, a cartoon portrait of shock. We found new ways to hold things down. The supermarkets quickly ran out of double-sided tape and strips of Velcro, useful for sticking bottles and canisters to the kitchen counter, for keeping knickknacks in place on the mantle, lamps grounded to end tables. We fit our shelves with doors to hold the books in place, and we carried twine to secure anything in danger of floating away. No one wears skirts anymore. We've tried to adjust. Eating is still difficult. Our mashed potatoes hover above the table like clouds. Our drinks won't stay in the glass. We add more butter to the potato recipe, trying to weigh them down, and lap water from the air like children chasing snowflakes with their tongues. There's no precipitation in a world of diminished gravity, and we miss the rain. The clouds release their water, and raindrops gather and circle high above the ground. We look up during a rainstorm as if looking at the sky from the bottom of a lake, the sun blurry behind a sheet of water far above our heads. Without rainfall, the grass turns brown, and so we mow the lawns one last time. The clippings rise into the air around us, fistfuls of confetti that will never fall. Each morning when we open our closets, the sleeves of our shirts are raised in the air, reaching for something we can't see. Sometimes we walk into the hall and are startled by a scarf that got loose, a silk ghost in midair slipping silently through the house. So many things are loud in this world. Aspirin rattles in its plastic bottle, silverware clatters in closed kitchen drawers, dolls knock against the lid of a toy box. Everything we've tried to contain is breaking free. Even the moon has retreated a little further into the background of the sky. When it gets too loud, we walk to the beach, where the oceans have stilled and our ears fill with the quiet of a shore that has no waves. We cover our faces with sunglasses and scarves to keep the loose grains of sand out of our eyes. Some of us dream of the day when the earth will remember itself and restore gravity. We live in fear of everything we have forgotten to tie down. We imagine a chef's knife sliding free from its wooden block and falling into the path of a child. We picture the pilots who are learning to fly in this new sky. We hear their screams as the planes suddenly tip back toward the ground. We hope for it. No one speaks of this, but some of us believe the loosening has only begun. that whatever hold the earth still claims on us will eventually go slack. We imagine ourselves, our children, and our homes, and the trees planted in our backyards, everything we've rooted to the ground, cracking free from the dirt and rising up. We picture the disappearance of cities, skylines breaking apart, each building like a baby tooth pulled out of the earth. How when our world is no longer solid enough to keep us in place, we'll all drift away and apart from each other, like a universe expanding. For now, we cope. When our children show off their new ability to fly, laughing with a joy that doesn't sense the danger, we only smile at them. At night, as we close our eyes to our new reality, we think of the babies born since the loosening, how they may never understand the meaning of their own weight. Across the globe, parents tie ribbon to the ankles of all those newborn babies each night. They wrap the other end around a bedpost or their own wrists before they fall asleep, pulling it taut to keep the babies close. The infants drift like kites beneath darkened bedroom ceilings. They sleep soundly, undisturbed by the strangeness of this new world. Their small bodies still remember how to float. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kara. Okay, next up, I'm delighted to introduce my friend Kirsten. Kirsten Porter is a freelance editor, poet, professor, and guest lecturer. She earned an MFA in creative writing from George Mason University. Porter has taught creative writing, composition, and literature studies at Marymount University. Her poetry and teachings focus on women, cultural diversity, community, and the ability for all to repair what is broken in themselves and the world. Porter is the assistant to poet and literary activist E. Ethelbert Miller and the editor of The Collected Poems of E. Ethelbert Miller, published by Willow Books. Please welcome Kirsten Porter.
Does this work? All right. First, I want to thank Sean for inviting me to read tonight. I'm really excited about the festival, and I think it's just a great opportunity for community. I love his vision, and I knew right away when I met him that he was the type of person that I wanted to stand with and support. So for those of you who will be at the festival tomorrow and Saturday, I think it's just going to be a wonderful time. So. Okay, so let's go ahead, and I have a few poems for you guys. Let's see. So one of the things I love about a festival, and Sean and I have talked a lot about this, is for every one of us that is a writer, we can usually pinpoint a time when we realized that we were not alone, that there were other people that thought like us and looked at the world a little bit differently, and that we weren't something wasn't terribly wrong with us. And for us, both of us, we had a writer's residency where we went to and we found this. So anytime there is an opportunity like a festival, I love being around other writers, hearing their works, talking with them, and seeing parts of them that I see in myself. Because again, we are actually a lot more similar than we are different. One of the things about being a writer for me is looking at the world for both the good and the bad. We see the beautiful and we see the not so beautiful, and we write about both, even if it means that we're writing about somebody that we love. So I would like to start by saying I love my grandmother, okay? I love her. She's no longer with us anymore, but my grandmother had a very hard time with change. And I think right now she would be very concerned about our world. So in some ways, I'm glad that she doesn't have to see what's going on right now. But the good thing about my grandmother is usually she did come around. So this poem is called Serenity Prayer. My grandmother believed you could pray everything to make it right again. Okay. Serenity Prayer. Backyard blondes was what my grandma called the women who lived next door, because they dyed their hair with sun in and sat outside on their deck drinking sangrias. What does it matter if they are sun-kissed blondes or Anne Shirley redheads, I asked. her back turned to me, stooped over, weeding a bed of roses. She straightened up, shaking off the dirt from her gloves. Because, she pursed her lips, it isn't natural. Evening, when the sun dipped below the garden hedge, she told me, these roses know, they're born pink, they stay pink. And my grandmother scrubbed at pots and pans, praying over soap suds and the noise from next door, wishing for a world already down the drain. And I said my own silent prayer, for the woman at the sink in her set ways, for the soft laughter from the unnatural blondes, for the pink sunset, all three, God's making. Again, my grandmother, she was married for 75 years to my grandfather, and she was amazing, and we lost her. Gosh, it's been about 7 years. So there is kind of this kind of look at what was not so great, but also what was beautiful. And also looking at yourself and thinking what you could have done differently. So this one is titled A Poem for My Grandmother. When you were still here, I had an appointment, a headache, too much work. No hour or two to offer you, not enough time to sit with you in the sun and read you a poem or hold your hand. When you are gone, I think you are still here for a moment. I pick up the phone to tell you the lilac tree is blooming. The cream is not right for a grasshopper pie. Until I remember. Why did I not press my love you words into your palm on all those afternoons of quiet and eucalyptus when you were still here? One thing about being a poet is that you see poems everywhere, right? And so this poem was actually looking at emails. It's called Like Poetry. Your emails like poetry. How you write your day in stanza thoughts, in jammed, I want to read your Tuesday message like, I'll be home by 5 or so, you know traffic, stopping for milk and dog food, and the cereal you like, is it on sale at Safeway or Giant? Can you let the dogs out if I'm late? Were you up late last night? I thought I heard you getting a drink of water, or maybe it was the sound of the lilac in the wind, its branches hitting the roof again. We really need the gardener to trim it back. My father is here today. He's a retired sports editor. He worked at USA Today and the Oakland Tribune. He did baseball and hockey and Olympics. And Ethelbert Miller is coming tomorrow. I've done a lot of work with him. So if you're here, you should catch, I think he's doing a panel with Sean on Saturday, but tomorrow he'll be with Sean and another of my friends, Holly, at night. And I love watching my father and Ethelbert talk baseball. And growing up, I grew up in the area. I lived in Herndon when Franklin Farms was still a farm. And we had this great big backyard because nothing was developed back there. So he taught me how to play baseball, and it was a great childhood. Baseball. You taught me how to hold the bat, hands wrapped around a garage sale Louisville slugger. Choke up a bit there, that's a good grip. You threw me easy pitches, then threw your hat in the air and whooped when bat touched ball, and I raced around the makeshift bases, a jump rope, a sneaker, a Cabbage Patch Kid, until I found myself chest heaving back at where we started. This is how it should have stayed, no curveballs between you and me, just a straight line pitch over the plate, so I could swing, feel the connection when bat meets ball, knowing what comes next, rounding all the bases to make my final run home. And then the nice thing about being a poet is also looking at how we change. how we are very different when we're children, relating with our parents than we are when we are adults. When we are adults, actually, we think, well, I guess when we are children too, we think we know better. But when we are adults, we get to say, I'm an adult now, I do know better. Not always right. So this one is called Chance of Rain. Because I have a hard time trusting, I didn't believe the forecast, 80% chance of rain. Took no coat, no umbrella, drove too fast with a broken left windshield wiper, hit a pothole, and now I'm stopped at the side of the road, flat tire, no spare, and it starts to rain. I look down at my useless hands, what could they do? Wouldn't know how to change a tire anyway. Oh, there were times when my father tried to tell me how, but I walked away from his words. Always talking at me, never showing me. This is how we solve for X. This is how we parallel park. This is how we hit a curveball. This is how we say goodbye. This is how we come back. What words of his come back to me now? Do not talk with your mouth full. Put your money in a savings account. Impact should never be used as a verb. Make sure you're eating enough protein. Toilet paper is expensive. Take a book and an umbrella, just in case. I have one more, but are we okay? Okay, so we're gonna take a switch, and this is also, again, when you're thinking about being a poet, sometimes you write about what is going on around you, what is hurting you when you see a friend hurting and you're trying to make sense of the world. And lately, there's been a lot of me trying to make sense of the world. So my friend was finally able to leave an abusive relationship, but she talks to me a lot about how it's really hard to trust again, and how every new relationship she tries, she feels like she maybe puts them through the fire, because even though they're not doing it, she's constantly going back to that terrible relationship. So I imagine what it would be like to love somebody that has been through that relationship, to be at fault for something you've never done, but to love somebody enough that you want to stay with them and help them learn what real love is. So this is written in that perspective. It's called Please. Last week I asked her, tell me the story again, the one where you left him. I'm thinking of writing an article about women who stay with men who hurt them, but she is different. She left. She sighs. Tells me again about the coffee pot she did not put back on the counter at a 45-degree angle, so he broke her jaw. When he fell asleep that night, she waited until the moon slipped behind the trees before leaving. Sometimes he returns, a storm line in her eye when something reminds her of him. The way I shift position in my chair, stop it. His favorite song on the radio, turn it off. When we argue and I start getting louder, please lower your voice. Please. Is what she said to me this morning when I was rushing out the door. Why were we angry at each other? I don't remember, but when I reached past her for my coat, she flinched. Tonight, I stand in front of the bathroom mirror. I raise my hands up to the glass and around my fingers into fists. Muscles tense, veins rising to the skin. These hands can create brokenness. Please. I let my fingers go slack, soften my stance. Please. Love in these hands. Please.
So much for sharing those with us. Our final reader for the first section here, and then we'll take a little break before our panel, so all the readers tonight have been semi-local, Northern Virginia, have ties to Northern Virginia. Our final reader for this session is actually a local. And I'm very happy to have met Jesse this past year, and she introduced herself to me by basically saying, how can I help? How can I get involved? So we were fast friends from that moment, but when I discovered that she was actually an excellent writer herself, I went from being a fan to a fan with a capital F, and I've been able to hear her read at one of our author series events, so I'm really looking forward to tonight. So let me introduce Jessie Lewis. Jessie grew up in rural Virginia. Her essays, short stories, and poems have been published or are forthcoming in Oxford American, Carve, Sonora Review, The Pinch, Yemassee, and Appalachian Heritage, among others. Her novel manuscript, She Spoke Wire, was a finalist for the Penn Bellwether Prize for Socially Engaged Fiction. Oxford American chose her short story, False Morals, as the 2018 False Morels, as the 2018 debut fiction winner, which is a big deal. Please join me in welcoming Jessie Lewis.
Right. Okay. So this is a little bit of a section from my novel manuscript that I'm working on now. And it's an interesting process of getting this out, so it's always really interesting to read it before it's actually out, but that's part of it. And so I tried to convince people to come out tonight by saying I'm going to read the part where my character loses her teeth. So that was like the goal of draw, but maybe not. Anyway, all right, so I'll go ahead and start. If there was a victim of Nora's mother's academic focus, it was Nora's teeth, specifically her upper right canine and its neighbor, along with her two lower fronts, both on the right, number 26 and number 25, and they were all located right in front. Nora had intense memories of her mother's years in graduate school. There were bursts of excitement. Graduate students had wild family-friendly parties, viewed alcohol and drug laws loosely, and were open to conversation with kids. At the same time, there was a constant unsteadiness. Lydia and Nora's healthcare came in and out at first. Dental and vision were commonly too expensive. On the 29th of each month, when Lydia hadn't prepared to pay off her school loans, the fridge was often empty. Lydia would call it a poor box of light. When this happened, they depended on food pantries 2 counties to the east, just far enough away that Lydia trusted she wouldn't see anyone from her department on the way. There were times, though, while Lydia and Nora struggled to get through the month, the colleges were desperate too, overwhelmed by older buildings taking on rain or great chunks of semesters canceled for weather events. Often classes were taught entirely online when snowfall and melt became overwhelming. Public schools from kindergarten through high school could barely react, so to make up for swaths of lost school days, summer vacation was more regularly canceled than maintained. During this time especially, one fact was reassuring to Nora. She knew that no matter what, Lydia would survive plagues and poverty. There was a certain determination in how her mother moved, how she made decisions, and even in how she heated Nora's chicken nuggets in the microwave while reading for graduate lecture the next day. Nora knew during her whole childhood that no matter the complication, Lydia knew how to shelter them and watch the destruction from afar. There was a necessary panic in this approach, a constant anxiety that Lydia nourished with her research. While she was determined, though, Lydia's forthright attitude commonly led to painfully forthright research and intensely forthright relationships. There would be a slew of victims, but that time she slept with her old professor for 6 months was the most dangerous. Nora only ever referred to him as Thomas. He seemed kind in the way he talked to Nora, clearly curious about her opinion on movies and news. He was wealthy, that was certain. His family funded his house, his cars, and his prior divorce. He found the general public interesting, as though he was watching ants magnified. This was fueled by his research in journalism rhetoric, but it often made him seem incapable of understanding the world. He'd ask questions of Nora like, what do your teachers do to get to work when it floods? Or how do people without garages maintain their cars? In some ways, Thomas had a child's view. Nora's mother found this endearing and sweet, though sometimes his dependency was obnoxious. He seemed to restrain Lydia with both hands on her shoulders or her hips whenever they were in the same room. Even if Lydia wasn't trying to move away from him, the hands would cleave to her. In Lydia's written statement to the police, this was one of the reasons why she broke up with him via letter. It was easier to do it without his hands nearby. Nora could remember on one Saturday her mother curling against Thomas in a restaurant booth, and then the next weekend, Thomas, in his green SUV, ramming their parked sedan in the driveway. When she heard the collision and the crunch of her car's wheel guard, Lydia jogged to watch through the kitchen window. "He's going to just get himself drenched in this rain," she said, staring. Her arms were crossed. She chewed her lip. Thomas stood in their yard, car door open, one hand smashing the horn. Lydia just stood there, a blanket wrapped around her shoulders while he raged outside. He was wearing a full suit in driving rain, her letter held high in his other fist. "Are you going to go out to talk to him, Mom?" Nora asked as she moved to the living room windows to get a better look. "No, Nora girl, I got the instructor position," Lydia called to the wall, "without his damn help." Then Thomas's feet were moving up to the front door, his massive shoulder blocking the peephole. The whole thing would lead to a broken handle on the front door, Lydia's forehead gaining its first wrinkle, and Nora's teeth scattered like shells across the hardwood floor. In the end, Lydia was allowed back to work once Thomas found new employment at a private school in Wyoming. Of course, the transition was easy since the Wyoming college owed Thomas's family after years of charitable donations. When Nora looked up the college online out of curiosity, she saw that its students and faculty lived on campus in a neighborhood of brick 12 miles from any town. The administration seemed to be most proud of their wall, a beautifully scrubbed, deep red brick behemoth that kept the world out and the students in after 11. Tuition was 6 times the amount of Wyoming's public colleges. Nora found herself hoping the forest fires would reach them soon and scorch their wall to red dust. Once Thomas was gone, as far as Nora could tell, Lydia was lucky she came out on the other side with her job at all. Single mothers, especially single mothers who dated interdepartmentally, didn't seem welcome in academia as far as Nora could tell. 7 months before Nora left with Roy, when she was 20, she met her mother at a white-walled coffee shop. Nora had worn a dress for the first time in months. She even wore her nice flats and leggings, even though it had started to snow outside in an odd fluke of large flakes. Lydia kissed her right palm in greeting and smiled. Nora relished the feeling of her mom's sticky lipstick. She was far, far from that day with Thomas, and far, far from her mother's house. "You look beautiful, my baby, so adult. You've got that look like you could go pick flowers, and everyone would find it endearing." "I'm jealous of that. Never had that. When I was in college, I was always just brooding." Lydia laughed lightly. It was the kind of laugh Nora always worked for. "It's good to see you, Ma," Nora smiled. She wasn't lying. There was a comfort in seeing Lydia, her dry laugh, that familiar speckle in her skin. They'd sipped their coffee. Then Lydia said, "Though it's been a while since we talked about your looks. And I hope by now that you would figure out that everyone notices your gaps." She pointed around the coffee shop, and the lone latte drinker to their left looked up, curious. "I have dental insurance," she continued, "which means you have dental insurance for a couple more years. Show your class at least and get that mouth fixed." Nora's eagerness to see her mother dropped. For a second, she looked over her mother's shoulder through the plate glass window. It was snowing much harder now. Lydia turned to look too. "Nobody is ready for the temperatures tonight, and the trees will start cracking from it," she said. Nora barely heard her mother, but she knew all this anyway. She timed this coffee date perfectly around the start of the weather, read 4 meteorology reports, and did her best to ignore the news outlets who didn't know how to talk about the specifics, what was coming, who would feel it worse. Nora stuttered, I don't need to show my class." "That's classist as hell, isn't it, to tell me I need to show my class?" Lydia paused. Nora hated her pauses. "What's classist? Me telling you to be you, or you choosing to pretend to be somebody else with a different financial background? Class is identity. Or didn't you learn anything from that first paper on New York? Who gets to say protected behind the seawall?" "This isn't related, you know," Nora breathed in, a rant forming about how wrong it was to compare this to Lydia's research from 5 years before, how wrong it was to connect Nora's teeth to mass destruction. Lydia's work on New York and New Jersey and the Hudson River had been her most successful. When the initial flood control efforts of low walls and artificial wetland parks failed along Manhattan's edge, the next solution for a water structure didn't just create the edges of a bowl to contain flooded water, but also diverted excess to lower income areas. Manhattan built a beast of a concrete and steel barrier so that a slow-moving hurricane could beat against it and then subsequently knock out most of Brooklyn and Jersey's protective barriers with diverted waves. At that time, Nora obediently read all of her mother's published work, and Nora had even cried over the last line. Now everyone waits for the right storm to come through, and it will. Lydia had always known how to point out the worst in people. Nora didn't finish her train of thought there in the coffee shop, but just eyed her mother. She could talk about what it had been like as a teenager to read emotionally restrained research that theorized the end of empathy, how disheartening that was. Nora clamped her lips instead and looked at the tablecloth. That was easier. Meanwhile, Lydia mumbled something, wrote a note to herself in a small notebook, and then moved it away. When she looked up again, Nora was running her fingers along the tablecloth's edge. "I'll be seeing you for your fall break then, this weekend?" Lydia asked. Nora didn't say anything.